Hello, everyone. This is Brian Tonsoni with a special edition of Extra Points, a Delphi bracketology production in conjunction with StudentUnionSports.com. We are going to bring you conference previews or mid-season, not previews, conference analysis of the 5 big conferences. And we'll have small panels that'll bring you all kinds of information on what has happened so far this season in college football. But before we get started, we have a quick weekly recap. Last week saw some big games. Alabama beating Tennessee quite handily, 49-19. Number 2, Ohio State eking out a win in Madison against number 8 Wisconsin, 30-23 in overtime. Clemson holding on and winning barely by 7 in overtime against North Carolina State. And a team to watch, undefeated Nebraska, went into Bloomington and defeated Indiana 27-22. Those were some of your key results from last week. Now we're going to send it over to our first panel, which will be discussing the SEC. What do you say,
Thanks,
Dave?
Brian. Now we're going to take a look at the SEC and how the SEC has gone so far halfway through the season. We're going to take a look at the SEC East and the SEC West. Some top teams in contention in the SEC East. We see some familiar teams. Florida and Tennessee are at the top once again. And it's probably going to come down to those 2 teams again. The SEC West, the top 2 teams, Alabama and Texas A&M. And we get to see those 2 teams match up this week. We're going to talk a little bit about some surprise teams. First of all, we'll talk about some surprise teams that have been a little bit better than expected. Who's been a surprise team to you, Cole?
I've really been watching Texas A&M. You know, their QB Knight, he's proven himself as a QB. He's able to hit those one-on-one coverages with his wide receivers. He's proven himself on the ground, as well as the Aggie defense. I mean, as we see with their game against Tennessee, they're able to force multiple turnovers and really just stop the ball in its tracks.
Who's a surprise team for you, Daniel?
As Cole said, I don't think a team's been better than Texas A&M in the country. Trevor Knight transferred from Oklahoma. He didn't have as much success as I would say as he's had so far in his one season at Texas A&M, and I think that's really proven dividends for Texas A&M and their success this season.
All right, now we'll take a look at some surprise teams that haven't lived up to the preseason hype. Who's a team that's really surprised you and not been as good, Daniel?
Well, I don't think that they had very high expectations, but I would say Mississippi State. And with their exit of Dak Prescott, I don't think their expectations were too high to begin with in this to start the season, but I don't think people realized that they would be this bad.
All right, what about you, Cole?
For me, it's LSU. Yes, their record is 4-2, but I mean, look who they've lost to. They lost to Auburn. Granted, they did lose to Wisconsin, and they barely beat Mississippi State. Plus Fournette, he's just really underachieving this season from what he did last season, and I think this team's starting to look like it's going a little downhill.
All right, we still have about half of the season left, but what are some games that we're going to continue to watch that could play a big role in the conference championship? What's the game that you're watching, Cole?
I think Texas A&M is versus Alabama. I think that's Alabama's biggest opponent yet. I think if Texas A&M gets a win past them, it's gonna, absolutely just change up the whole year. It'll definitely solidify Texas A&M's bid into the playoffs, but I think that's the biggest one of this upcoming week.
And I'd also throw in there for the SEC East, probably the biggest game left is Florida at LSU, a game that got canceled because of Hurricane Matthew, and they didn't know if they're going to play it. Now, after Tennessee lost 2 in a row, now it looks like it's going to have to be played because it could play an impact in who's going to win that SEC East and face either probably Texas A&M or Alabama in the conference championship. All right, so that's a little preview and review of the SEC. Now let's send it over to TJ Nelson and his group for the Big Ten.
All right, today I'm sitting here with senior Jesse Scouten and freshman Joe Perry, and we're going to be talking about the Big Ten. The top teams in contention, we believe. In the West, we have Nebraska and Wisconsin, and in the East, Ohio State and Michigan. Jesse, can you give me your surprise good team of the year?
I think it's got to be Nebraska. No one's turned more heads than the Cornhuskers. Most analysts projected them 7-5 or 6-6 range, but now they're sitting at 6-0 overall and 3-0 in conference. And their only tough games are Michigan and Ohio State. And if them finishing 10-2, I'd say that's a good year.
Yeah, as well as I. Joe, what's your surprise team this year?
My surprise team is Michigan. First of all, they beat number 10 Wisconsin 14-7, and they've been blowing the rest of their schedule out of the water.
Yeah, I agree very strongly, Joe. Jesse, on the other hand, what's your not so good team?
I'd say Michigan State. They came out with a 2-0 start, but have lost 4 straight in the Big Ten. And their schedule's no easy task because they still got to play Michigan and Ohio State. So I feel like they're not even going to make a bowl game.
I agree with that. Joe, and for your not so good team.
I agree with Jesse on this one. Michigan State, they started off 2-0, and I was feeling optimistic about their season, but then they dropped these last 4 games, and like Jesse said, I think it's going to be hard for them to get a good postseason game, if any.
Yep. We still have a few weeks left of the playoffs, until the playoffs. Jesse, what's a game you want to watch?
I got Purdue at IU. This has no playoff contention whatsoever, but I'm still a big Old Oaken Bucket fan, so I hope the Hoosiers bring it home.
And for you, Perry?
I have Michigan at Ohio State. I think this is going to be key in the Big Ten championship game. So I feel like whoever wins that's going to most likely win the championship.
Yeah, and I have Nebraska at Wisconsin. This could decide who wins the West, and it could be a very important game to shape up the Big Ten championship match. Now it's time for our hot cold segment with Cole. We're gonna shoot it over to you, Cole.
Cole Rickles here with your hot segment of the week. We're going to start off with Purdue's decision to fire Coach Hazel. Finally, hopefully this area of Delphi, West Lafayette will finally have a good football program to watch. And honestly, this decision, it's hotter than this. Wow. You're welcome. Back here with your cold segment of the week, we have Clemson. They ended up beating NC State, but they allowed the touchdown by NC State in the fourth quarter, pushing it to overtime. Again, Clemson ends up winning. I think they proved that they didn't really know how to win, but they figured out how to survive against this team. It should have been a blowout. Either way, Clemson better step it up in the next few weeks. But overall, I mean, this game was colder than a fart in a dead Eskimo. You know what I'm saying?
Overall, football this week was hotter than this shoulder. Back to you guys in the studio.
Thanks, Cole, for that. Another segment on the hot and cold for this week. Now we're going to take a look at the ACC. In the ACC Coastal Division, it's basically become a 3-team race. North Carolina, Pittsburgh, and Virginia Tech. North Carolina has beaten Pittsburgh and lost to Virginia Tech. Pittsburgh and Virginia Tech still have to play each other. In the Atlantic Division, it's basically down to Clemson and Louisville. So Clemson coming off a really strong season last year. They haven't played as well this year, but they're still undefeated and still getting the job done. What's been a good team that's kind of surprised you, TJ?
I think North Carolina has been my surprise team. They beat Florida State. They beat Miami pretty swiftly, a large score. I believe that they're going to be a team to watch, and they could steal the Coastal Division.
What's been a team that's really surprised you, Jesse?
I think it's got to be Louisville. Lamar Jackson has taken the college landscape by storm. He's already had 15 touchdowns and over 1,800 yards. What impresses me the most about Louisville, though, is their defense. I think it's overlooked, and that's what's been carrying them so far.
All right. What about a team that's not been as good as the preseason hype, Jesse?
I got to go with Miami on this one. They got out to a blazing start with a 70-3 victory over FAMU, but they lost 2 straight games to start out league play. But I'm optimistic about this team because they have Brad Kaye and a backloaded schedule.
All right, what about you, TJ? What's a team that's really surprised you?
I have Florida State. They haven't really done much this year. Everybody was expecting them to be a top 5 playoff team, but it looks like they're not going to show up. They're trying to rely on Cook, but when you're down, you can't run the ball very much.
All right, and halfway through the season, we still have some good games left. What's a game that you're going to keep an eye on this season in the ACC, Jesse?
It's got to be Clemson at Florida State. This is a heavy battle, and it looks like a good matchup.
All right, what about you, TJ? What game are you looking for?
Virginia Tech at Pittsburgh. I feel like that could decide the Coastal Division.
All right, and another game to kind of watch for the ACC. It doesn't really have implications for the conference race, but Louisville at Houston towards the end of November. The winner of this game might still have an outside chance if they take care of business and win the rest of their games to sneak into that playoff Final Four or at least get a good New Year's Day bowl game. All right, now we will send it over to Brian for a preview of the Pac-12.
Thanks, Dave. We're here to talk a little Pac-12 football midseason review of the conference. Right now, the top teams in contention. The North belongs to Washington. Washington State is also 3-0, but I think Washington's the team to beat in the North. They've just been surprising everyone this year. Over in the South, it is wide open, and there are several teams, but we believe here at Delphi Bracketology it's going to come down to Utah, Colorado, with an outside chance of the USC Trojans winning a few games and representing the South in the Pac-12 championship. We're going to talk about some surprise teams. I'm here with Jensen Reef Sr. and Carson Noonkester. We're going to bring them in now. Surprise team in the Pac-12 for you, Jensen.
Well, I have Washington State being my surprise team. They're 3-0 in their conference right now, and after losing the first two non-conference games, QB Luke Falk has thrown over 2,000 yards just after playing hard football, and then he also has 16 touchdowns and only 5 interceptions. And in my opinion, Washington State's being surprisingly good.
And we'll see what they can do the rest of the season. Carson, your surprise team in the Pac-12.
I got Colorado, and their running back Philip Lindsay has rushed over 600 yards and 9 touchdowns on the season. The Buffs' defense has also been solid in giving up only 20 points per game.
And let's look at some teams that have been struggling in the Pac-12. Let's go to you, Jensen. What team has surprised you with their struggles?
Well, it's hard to believe it, but Oregon's definitely right there. I mean, they're 0-3 in the conference, 2-4 overall. The Ducks, they can't stop anyone giving up over 41 points a game, so it's hard to believe it, but Oregon's right there.
And Carson, your team that has been a surprise team that struggled out west.
UCLA, they're 1-3 in the conference and 3-4 overall. The Bruins defense, led by QB Josh Rosen, just has not scored constantly this season.
And I'll throw in Arizona, sitting at 2-5 and not winning in the conference, and that was a team that we expected to be quite a bit more competitive. Let's talk about some games that might be on the schedule that our listeners might want to watch. Jensen, what game do you think in the Pac-12 will really determine the outcome?
UCLA and USC, that'll be definitely a big one to watch for. It could play overall. You could greatly affect USC. They could go down on the bottom. They could go right back up the top. We don't know. But that's one to keep an eye for.
Great tradition, too. And Carson, your game to watch in the Pac-12.
I got Washington versus Washington State. It could be for the North Championship.
I agree. That's going to come down, and that's always at the end of the year. If Washington State keeps winning, that'll be a really big game to watch. Any game with Utah, Utah's sitting at number 19 ranked. Washington versus Utah, they play. That's going to be a huge game in the Pac-12. So that does it for our Pac-12 review. Now it's time for the interesting fact of the week with Jesse Scout.
Thanks, Brian. Today's interesting fact comes from Columbus, Ohio, where this past weekend J.T. Barrett became the all-time leading scoring touchdowns for Ohio State with 89. Urban Meyer has had great success at Ohio State. Tell me about it.
He's had a record of 56-4 and it has had a 8-game winning streak.
Back to you guys.
Hi, I'm Senior Daniel Jakes, along with Senior Jensen Reef and Senior Will Schwindler. Today we'll be talking about the Big 12, some top teams in contention. Definitely Baylor. They're sitting at 6-0 and 3-0 in conference play. West Virginia also undefeated, 5-0 and 2-0 in conference play. While Oklahoma's just sitting there at 4-2, but also undefeated in conference play. Guys, what are some surprise teams that have really shown good signs this year? Jensen?
West Virginia, definitely. 5-0 in the conference, or not in the conference, but 5-0 in general. They were expected to finish in the middle of their conference this year, with only 6 to 7 wins, and they're currently shocking us all. It's just they're one team to be definitely watching out for, and they'll probably remain on top there in the Big 12.
Will?
I definitely think Baylor. I don't think many people had a good feeling for where Baylor would be this season, but they're unstoppable, and with 44 points a game, that's hard to stop.
I would agree with you guys on both those teams. What's been a really downward spiraled team this season, Will?
TCU. They might have a winning record right now, but really hasn't been the type of Patterson team that you're used to seeing. Defense has been pretty lackluster, and it's pretty much just the offense that's just keeping them where they're at right now.
Jensen, what do you have to say to that?
Texas, only 30 touchdowns total this season so far. The Longhorns have been rather disappointing for us here. Texas, they're being a bust this year, 7th in their conference. The Big 12 the Texas Longhorns aren't giving much to their state. So for all you Texas fans, there's always A&M and there's Texas Tech. So choose one of them, but I'd get away from the Longhorns.
What would you guys say are some games to watch that it's left remaining on the schedule?
I'm going to have to go with Baylor and Oklahoma. That seems like it'll be definitely one of the big ones to watch. I mean, I think it'll be one that people will review constantly and say, wow, this is definitely a great game to be played.
Well,
I think Baylor at West Virginia because two top teams. Can't wait to see it.
I can't disagree with you guys there. We're going to send it back to Brian Tonsoni at the studio.
Thanks, Daniel. We're going to wrap things up for this week of Extra Points with our conference mid-season reviews. We do have a game of the week for you to watch this week. It is number 6 Texas A&M versus number 1 Alabama. That's going to go a long way to determine the national championship, and it's a game that everyone would want to watch. A couple upsets to watch. Iowa over Wisconsin. Wisconsin with a tough loss. Can they battle back on the road against Iowa? Look for Iowa maybe to win that game. And watch for a UCLA team that's better than what they've played, defeating number 19 Utah. Our midseason pick is right here. We think Alabama-Ohio State is going to be your championship matchup. And we look forward to seeing how the second half of the season plays. We'll be back to regular programming next week. This is Brian Tonsoni for Extra Points, Week 8. From Delphi Bracketology and Student Union Sports.com. We'd like to give out a shout out to IU DJ Unique for the music, and hope you enjoy your college football this weekend. Thanks.